Hello, this is Daniel Mart. Now, before you actually watch the video, A History of Film Prototype, A History of Comic Book Films, I just want to tell you guys that this is kind of an intro, so to speak, to this web series I am going to be producing pretty soon. It's going to be on a third channel. It's a different channel. I have two channels already. Daniel Mart, which is started in 2013, where I did comic book reviews and movie reviews and stuff like that. This is my second channel. The acting channel is my second channel. And this third channel, which is going to be called A History of Film, I'll leave a link up here and down in the description below. And basically, this is going to be like a web series. I don't know how long it's going to last. Hopefully it'll last for a long time. But this web series is basically going to tell you a history of film, different topics on films or people who inspired films or stuff like that. So yeah, now this topic is going to be about comic book films, and it's a prototype, so it's not going to be as polished information-wise. It's not going to be as polished as a normal episode would be, and the way it's presented, me in front of some kind of whiteboard and whatever, it's going to be vastly different from that. The way it's going to be presented, it's going to be vastly different from that. So yeah, but again, this is a prototype just to give you guys an idea. Now the video, the actual video of me presenting is a little bit over 12 minutes long. It's a little bit over 12 minutes long, which is more or less how long a normal episode would be. A normal episode, I assume, would be between 10 and 30 minutes long, give or take. And yeah, hopefully you guys enjoy it. And yeah, now on to the video. Hopefully you guys enjoy. And again, before I end it, again, this is going to be part of a new web series. If you guys want to go check it out and check out the web series and whatever, I will have a trailer up for it pretty soon as well in the next few days. And if you guys want to go subscribe to the channel where this web series is going to happen, again, links up here and down below. And yeah, that's basically it for now. And hopefully you guys enjoy the video.
Go.
Now?
Yes,
okay.
now. I'm sorry.
As you can see, today I'm going to be presenting history of comic book movies. Now, before I begin, may I ask all of you, what is your favorite comic book movie? Anybody?
I'm gonna say the Avengers. Why not?
Okay. Preferably for me, The Dark Knight. I'm a huge fan of them.
Deadpool.
Avengers, Deadpool.
That will be fine.
XMen.
XMen. Great choice. Now, why did I ask you? You'll see. Now, as I said before, Batman. Here we have Batman. Now, back in the 70s, late 70s to the early 90s, we had the start of comic movies in the mainstream. Now, before that, we had a few TV shows, the Batman TV show with Adam West and some of the Captain America serials from the 40s. But up until now is when we started seeing a lot of comic book movies. Primarily Batman with Michael Keaton and Tim Burton, Superman with Christopher Reeves, and then the TMNT movies, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle movies, based off on the animated TV show from that time. Now, these all revolutionized movies as a whole, and specifically comic movies, and to a lesser extent action movies, because of how they were. Christopher Reeves, Superman movies, we never seen special effects like that from that time. Being able to see someone supposedly fly. Batman, we never saw a story that dark, that dealt with such dark topics, from racist to just crimes and murder and all the likes, and just products that were harmful to environments and people as a whole. And TMNT, they revolutionized because of the puppeteering skills. If you guys didn't know, the suits, they're actually suits, and however, for some of the action scenes, they did use puppets. And at the time, that's really revolutionary because many people didn't think that puppets that big, which were about 5'6", give or take, could actually do like the stunt, quote unquote, that they did. Now, during the 90s, there was kind of a downfall in comic book movies. Late 80s to most of the 90s, there was kind of a downfall in comic book movies with the likes of Spawn, Blade, Howard the Duck, Captain America with the 90s Captain America, Supergirl, and there were a few good ones such as Dick Tracy, The Mask, and Crow, but for the most part there's kind of just this really gap in between where nobody really thought of this as an actual possible genre. Some of the more popular film comic book companies that did get comic book movies was Dynamite with The Phantom and Shadow both getting theirs, and Dick Tracy as well. now into the new millennium. This is when we really start to see comic book movies come into their form, and how we more or less see them today with the likes of XMen and SpiderMan being some of the first ones. XMen being really social, and the fact that it was in relations to homosexuality. For those who don't know, both Ian McKellen and the director Bryan Singer are homosexuals, and they kind of tried to draw this parallel between how mutants were treated in the public eye, and how homosexuals and gays and the LGBT community was treated in the public eye during that time in the early 2000s and late 90s. Spider-Man was a more child-friendly, so to speak, comic book film, because before that we had the darker tones of the Batman movies and the more serious tones of the TMNT movies and the Superman movies during the 80s, and then during the 90s there really wasn't that big of a cap, with some of the more darker movies being The Crow and Dick Tracy. And this is really, we saw more lighter tone in comic book movies. We also saw a bit more social tones with V for Vendetta, how it's all against the government, how the government is trying to trick us. And then we just did get our fun comic book movies such as Fantastic Four, Sin City, and Hellboy, where they are fun, a bit social conscious, but for the most part they are still fun as a whole. There are films that you probably didn't know were based off comics, such as Road to Perdition and History of Violence. So there's always that. And then Batman did get a facelift after the Schumacher films with the Nolan Trilogy, which I'll talk about more in a later slide. Next up, there's two companies that dominate the comic book industry at this moment. They're called Marvel and DC. Marvel, at this moment, is owned by Disney. And right now, their biggest franchise is the MCU. Started off with Iron Man, and many people didn't think that this was possible. The only thing that made it possible was during the end credit scene where Sam Jackson as Nick Fury came out and told Tony Stark, he told Tony Stark that we are trying to do the Avengers Initiative, and that basically opened up the doors to have Hulk, Thor, Captain America, and which was initially Phase 1, where we saw Captain America in World War II, and that kind of dealt with the medical side of stuff, as as a super serum kind of jacked up his body. And during that time, that's kind of when drugs kind of started getting invented and found out. So it's kind of a social issue and how that kind of affected the human body as a whole. Thor, he's an Asgardian god, and they just kind of tried to add a bit more of myths into the whole MCU. As for Hulk, kind of similar situation with Captain America, only his is a bit more dire, to say the least. During Phase 23, we got the likes of Black Panther, Guardians of the Galaxy, Ant-Man, and Doctor Strange at the corner. Those, Black Panther's, from what we've seen so far, deals more on the race issue and how he's not really perceived as a powerful superhero at the moment due to the fact that he's from a different country and because he's African American. Guardians of the Galaxy is more of a general comic book movie, as it is in space. Many people compare it to Star Wars as the closest thing that the MCU is probably going to get to Star Wars. Ant-Man, again, a bit on the medical side, and how technology can also be of an advantage and disadvantage in that regard. Doctor Strange hasn't come out yet, but if I had to take a wild guess at this point, I'm assuming it involves some kind of thing with mysticism, maybe a bit of religion, possibly, but again, it hasn't come out at the moment, so I'm not going to comment. Then Avengers, probably one of the most revolutionary comic book films of all time, because although it doesn't have a direct message, it was one of the first times, or it was the first time, where a huge ensemble of comic book movies or comic book characters has ever been introduced in that fashion. Next up, we've got the X-Men series. As I said before, the X-Men films were a bit more social conscious with the first three X-Men movies, X-Men, X2, X-Men United, and The Last Stand, having dealt with the issues on homosexuality and how homosexuals are portrayed, those parallels. And a real great scene, I believe it's in the first one, the first X-Men scene, is when they have these congressmen, have Magneto and Professor X, and they're in this courtroom, they're hearing these congressmen and how some of these, how the mutant problem should be handled. And that kind of harkens back to how the LGBT community was kind of treated and how they were, quote-unquote, a problem for society at the moment, similar to mutants. Where you see in First Class, Days of Future Past, and Apocalypse, that deals more on the race issue, because they were mostly from the 60s, 70s, and 80s. Those deal more on the race issue and some of the other issues that were troubling at that moment. Although First Class didn't really deal with it that much. It was really Days of Future Past that probably dealt with it the most, as mutants were really discriminated against during that time because there wasn't really that much trust because of the events of First Class. Similar how there wasn't really that much trust to African Americans because of the stuff with Martin Luther King. And then in X-Men Apocalypse, there's this scene, or a couple scenes where towards the end, where they explain how despite the fact that we have developed a closer bond to mutants, similar to how during the 90s we developed a closer bond with the LGBT community, due to the events that happened, being the stuff with Apocalypse and how he's going to end the world. We don't know if we could trust the mutants anymore. Similar how the AIDS issue was kind of similar to that, how people didn't know if they could trust the LGBT community because of AIDS and HIVs and all that situation. Then we have the likes of Wolverine, who's maybe one of the biggest staples of the whole X-Men series, and he's always struggled by his past. He was born right before the Civil War, and he's just had this his mutations that he's aside from the metal class, the fact that he is immortal, so he's had to struggle with so much guilt because of deaths of so many loved ones and with all that he's had to gone through. So that's basically his journey. And as for Deadpool, it's just satirizing the whole comic book industry as a whole. He's satirizing. He's like, this is pretty stupid. Why do we keep making sequels and reboots and all this? I mean, it doesn't really matter. Let's just make a good movie. Come on, boobies. So yeah. Now on to Spider-Man. Spider-Man, along with the X-Men films, were probably some of the first proper comic book films against the first Spider-Man with Tobey Maguire and Sam Raimi, being the stepping stone to the rest of these comic book films. Again, they were more of a lighter tone and were more relaxed. Now, some of the villains, especially in the Spider-Man movies, were probably, for the most part, good guys right before they turned bad. Green Goblin, Dr. Octopus, namely, and the Lizard, and the Amazing Spider-Man movies. Now, in the Amazing Spider-Man, they came into a more darker tone, and that was basically the only change. Now, in Amazing Spider-Man, he was portrayed by Andrew Garfield. Now, as for Tom Holland's Spider-Man, we have yet to find out, as he will make his first full-fledged appearance in Spider-Man Homecoming in the next year, I believe. Up to now, he's just had an appearance in Civil War, so we have yet to find out what his social issues, if any, he will be dealing with. But as he is a sophomore in college, in high school, we could address possible stuff, how he's just dealing with the world and how he's finally coming out into the real world. Now into DC. Now we have the Nolan trilogy. Trilogy, which is basically similar to Spider-Man in a sense with their villains, how they're typically not bad guys to begin with. I mean, some of them are debatable. For the most part, when they begin with, they're not typically bad guys. However, these took a more darker tones with the likes of murder and just rape and a bunch of all these darker topics. Just took centerfold to basically make the Nolan trilogy. Now for the DCEU, starts off with Man of Steel, and then goes on to Batman v Superman, which is right there. And basically what they managed to accomplish is, aside from pissing off fans with Batman v Superman, what they managed to accomplish is that they tried to deal again with the social issues of the world. However, they just didn't do it as brilliantly as some of us had hoped for. Right now, since the only two movies to have come out at this moment are Man of Steel and Batman v Superman, we have yet to find out what will happen in Suicide Squad, Justice League, Flash, Aquaman, and Wonder Woman. Then some other popular comic book films you have are the Michael Bay TMNT movies, Fantastic Four, Men in Black, Kick-Ass, Punisher, Watchmen, Jonah Hex, 300, Judge Dredd, and Kingsman, and Snowpiercer, and these all deal from different topics such as mutations and the human body, such as TMNT, to just the government, such as Watchmen. Some of them are just fun comic book movies, but these are just other popular comic book movies, and they all have different messages within them. Thank you for listening.
Thank you.